Rosa checked her watch. A simple timepiece her late husband Luis had given her on their 10th anniversary. It was 7:45 a.m. Her first ever college class would begin at 8:30. Just enough time to change out of her work clothes in the staff bathroom and grab a quick coffee from the campus cafe. In the small bathroom mirror, Rosa studied her reflection as she changed. At 42, her face carried the gentle lines of someone who smiled often despite life's hardships. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, with a few strands of gray she never bothered to hide. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing down the simple navy blouse she had ironed so carefully the night before. Rosa had never finished high school back in her small hometown in Mexico. Life had other plans: marriage at 18, moving to America at 20, 2 children by 25, and then Luis's sudden illness that left her a widow at 36. But through it all, she had kept a secret dream alive: to earn a college degree someday. That someday had finally arrived after years of saving every spare dollar from her cleaning job. Her daughter Lucia, now in her final year of high school, had helped her apply for admission and financial aid. When the acceptance letter came, they had cried together at their kitchen table. Just one class at first, Rosa had decided, to see if I can do it. And so here she was, about to attend Introduction to Calculus, taught by the renowned Professor Richard Simmons. The coffee shop was bustling with students, most of them typing on laptops or scrolling through phones. Rosa felt out of place as she waited in line, clutching her worn purse. The young cashier barely looked at her when taking her order. Probably, assuming she was one of the cleaning staff grabbing a quick break. With 15 minutes to spare, Rosa found room 203 and paused outside the door. Through the small window, she could see students already filing in, all of them at least 20 years younger than her. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. For a moment she considered turning around, going home, forgetting this crazy idea. Then she remembered Lucia's face when she had helped Rosa buy her textbooks. "I'm so proud of you, Mama," she had said. "You're showing me that it's never too late." Taking a deep breath, Rosa pushed open the door and stepped inside. The classroom was larger than she had expected, with about 40 students finding their seats. Most were dressed in casual clothes: jeans, hoodies, sneakers. Rosa suddenly felt overdressed in her blouse and slacks, the outfit she had so carefully chosen to make a good impression. She spotted an empty seat in the front row. Growing up, her father, a mathematics teacher in their village, had always told her, "Sit in the front, where you can see everything." It was one of the many pieces of advice she still carried with her, along with the unexpected gift for numbers he had passed on to her. As Rosa made her way to the empty chair, conversations hushed. She felt eyes following her, heard whispers she couldn't quite make out. A girl with bright purple hair leaned to her friend and murmured something that made them both laugh. Rosa kept her gaze forward, her back straight. She sat down and pulled out her brand-new notebook and the heavy calculus textbook that had cost nearly a week's wages. From her pencil case, a gift from her son Miguel, she took a perfectly sharpened pencil and placed it on the desk. "Ready?" A few minutes later, the door opened again and Professor Simmons strode in. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed beard peppered with gray. Without greeting the class, he set his briefcase on the desk and began pulling out papers. "Welcome to Introduction to Calculus," he announced, his voice filling the room without effort. "I'm Professor Simmons. If you're looking for an easy credit, you're in the wrong place. Roughly 30% of students who take this course fail the first time." A nervous murmur rippled through the room. Rosa gripped her pencil tighter. "I'll take attendance now," he continued, picking up a sheet of paper. "When I call your name, raise your hand so I can begin to associate faces with names." He began, reading from his list, barely looking up as hands rose throughout the classroom. When he reached Ortiz Rosa, there was a slight pause before he called it out, as if surprised by the name. Rosa raised her hand. "Present," she said clearly, determined that her voice would not shake. Professor Simmons looked up, his eyebrows rising slightly as he took in her appearance. His gaze lingered on her, longer than it had on the other students. Several people turned in their seats to look at her. "Mrs. Ortiz," he said finally, "you're aware this is a calculus course?" Heat rose to Rosa's cheeks. "Yes, Professor," she answered. He seemed about to say something more, but instead made a small mark on his paper and continued with the roll call. After attendance, Professor Simmons launched into his first lecture, explaining the course structure, grading policy, and expectations. Rosa wrote everything down, her handwriting neat and precise just as her father had taught her. "Mathematics is not something you can learn by simply memorizing formulas," the professor was saying. "It requires logical thinking, problem-solving skills, and practice. Lots of practice." Rosa nodded to herself. This was exactly what her father used to tell his students. As the lecture continued, Professor Simmons began introducing basic concepts. He wrote equations on the board, explaining limits and functions. Rosa found herself transported back to her childhood, sitting at the kitchen table while her father demonstrated similar ideas using everyday objects. Oranges divided into sections to explain fractions, walking distances to explain rates of change. The professor's voice brought her back to the present. "Any questions so far?" he asked, looking around the room. Several students raised their hands, asking about the homework schedule and exam dates. Rosa remained silent, though she had followed everything so far. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself. As the class ended, students began packing up their things. Rosa carefully placed her notebook in her bag, making sure her notes were secure. She would review them tonight after her evening shift, while waiting for Lucia to return from her part-time job at the grocery store. "Mrs. Ortiz, a moment, please," Professor Simmons called as she stood to leave. Rosa's stomach tightened as she approached his desk. Had she done something wrong already? The professor shuffled some papers, not looking at her immediately. "I noticed you're not on the usual student track," he said finally. "You're registered as a non-traditional student." "Yes, sir," Rosa replied. "This is my first college course." He glanced up at her. "May I ask why you chose calculus as your first course? Most adult learners start with something less challenging." Rosa hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My father was a mathematics teacher. He taught me many things when I was young before I had to leave school. Numbers have always made sense to me." Professor Simmons looked skeptical. "This course moves quickly, Mrs. Ortiz. We build on concepts day by day. If you fall behind, it will be difficult to catch up." "I understand," Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm prepared to work hard." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded dismissively. "Very well. The first homework assignment is on the syllabus. It's due Wednesday." "Thank you, Professor," Rosa said, though he had already turned his attention elsewhere. As she walked out of the classroom, Rosa noticed a small group of students watching her. They quickly looked away when she passed, but she heard one of them say, "Isn't she one of the cleaning staff?" Outside the building, Rosa paused on the steps, taking in the campus around her. Students hurried past, laughing and talking, carrying backpacks and coffee cups. They all seemed so young, so confident, so much like they belonged. For a moment, doubt crept in again. What was she thinking? A middle-aged cleaning woman trying to study calculus alongside kids who had just finished high school. Professor Simmons clearly didn't believe she could succeed. Maybe he was right. Then she remembered something her father used to say. "Education doesn't belong to the young or the rich or the privileged. Knowledge is for anyone brave enough to seek it." Rosa straightened her shoulders and began walking toward the bus stop. She had a 3-hour break before her afternoon cleaning shift began. Just enough time to get home, make lunch for when Miguel returned from school, and start on that homework assignment. She might not look like the other students. The path ahead might be harder for her than for them. But she had waited too long and worked too hard to give up now, before she'd even begun. As she waited for the bus, Rosa opened her notebook and reviewed her notes from class, a small smile forming on her lips. The numbers and symbols, already, felt like old friends welcoming her back after a long absence. The subject matter was growing more difficult with each passing day. Professor Simmons had moved from basic concepts to derivatives, and Rosa often found herself rereading the textbook chapters 3 or 4 times, trying to grasp ideas that seemed just beyond her reach. "You look tired, Mama," Lucia said one evening, finding Rosa asleep at the table, her face pressed against an open textbook. Rosa straightened up quickly, wiping a bit of drool from the corner of her mouth. "Just resting my eyes," she said with a small smile. Lucia picked up one of Rosa's homework papers covered in eraser marks and crossed out calculations. "This looks really hard." "It is," Rosa admitted. "But your grandfather used to say that nothing worth doing is ever easy." "You talk about him a lot lately," Lucia observed, sitting down across from her mother. Rosa nodded. "Being in that classroom reminds me of him. The way he loved numbers, how his eyes would light up when explaining a difficult concept," she sighed. "I wish I had paid more attention when he tried to teach me. Back then I was more interested in running around with my friends than learning mathematics." "But you're learning now," Lucia said, squeezing her mother's hand. "And I bet he would be really proud." Rosa hoped so, but as she gathered her papers and prepared for bed, doubt gnawed at her. Tomorrow's class would cover implicit differentiation, a concept she had struggled with all week. If only there were more hours in the day to study. Next morning in class, Rosa took her usual seat in the front row. She had noticed that none of the younger students ever chose to sit beside her, leaving an empty chair on either side. It hurt at first, but now she appreciated the extra space for her textbook and notes. Professor Simmons entered precisely at 8:30, as always. He never smiled when greeting the class, moving straight into his lecture without pleasantries. Today, he seemed particularly stern as he wrote a series of complex equations on the board. "Yesterday we began our discussion of implicit differentiation," he said, tapping the board with his chalk. "Today we'll explore more challenging examples. Before we begin, let's see if anyone completed the practice problems I assigned." A few hands went up around the room. Rosa kept hers down. She had attempted the problems but wasn't confident in her solutions. "No volunteers? Then I'll choose someone." Professor Simmons' eyes scanned the classroom before landing on Rosa. A small, tight smile appeared on his face. "Mrs. Ortiz, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate how to solve this problem?" He pointed to a particularly complex equation on the board, one that involved trigonometric functions, the type Rosa had found most difficult. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening. After 3 weeks of largely ignoring her, Professor Simmons had decided to make an example of her. The classroom fell silent. Rosa felt every eye turn toward her. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she slowly gathered her notebook and pencil. A few students snickered. One whispered something about the cleaning lady, just loud enough for her to hear. Rosa's legs felt wooden as she walked to the board. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the chalk from Professor Simmons, careful not to meet his gaze. The equation loomed before her, a jumble of symbols that suddenly seemed alien despite her hours of study. 3 par plus cos xy, 7 and 2 plus 2 find di dx. Rosa stared at the problem, her mind going blank. The silence in the room pressed against her like a physical weight. She could feel Professor Simmons watching her, probably satisfied that his point was being made, that she didn't belong here. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to calm her racing heart. And in that moment of darkness, she heard her father's voice as clear as if he were standing beside her. "When a problem seems too big, break it into pieces you can hold in your hand." Rosa opened her eyes and looked at the equation again. Instead of seeing one intimidating problem, she began to see its parts. This was just implicit differentiation. She needed to take the derivative of each term with respect to x, remembering that y is a function of x. She took a deep breath and began writing. First, the term y3. Using the chain rule, the derivative would be 3y2 di dx. Next, cos xy. This was trickier, requiring both the chain rule and product rule. The derivative of co as xy would be sin xy, x di dx plus y, 1. The right side was easier. The derivative of 7 mod 2 would be 14x and the derivative of 2 would be 0. Rosa wrote each step carefully, her hand growing steadier as she progressed. The whispers behind her had stopped. Even Professor Simmons remained silent as she worked. When she had differentiated each term, she collected all the terms with didx on one side of the equation and everything else on the other side. Then she factored out didx and solved for it. Finally, she wrote the answer: di dx, gast 14x, sin xy swas y, 3y2, sin xy x. Rosa stepped back from the board, suddenly aware that she had been so absorbed in the problem that she'd forgotten her nervousness. She turned to face the class, expecting to see boredom or mockery. Instead, she found wide eyes and surprised expressions. One student in the back row was frantically copying down her work. Another was nudging his neighbor and pointing at Rosa's solution. Professor Simmons cleared his throat. He approached the board slowly, examining Rosa's work with narrowed eyes. She braced herself for criticism, for him to point out some error she had made. "This is," he began, and Rosa held her breath. "This is correct, though your approach is unconventional." Rosa blinked in surprise. "Unconventional?" Professor Simmons tapped the middle section of her work. "Most students would have combined these steps. Your method is more methodical, but it arrives at the correct answer." He sounded almost disappointed. "It's how my father taught me," Rosa said quietly. "To break down problems into smaller pieces." The professor gave her a curious look before turning back to the class. "You may return to your seat, Mrs. Ortiz." As Rosa walked back to her chair, she noticed something had changed. Some students were looking at her with newfound respect. Others seemed confused, as if trying to reconcile the cleaning woman they'd dismissed with the person who had just solved a complex problem on the board. For the remainder of the class, Professor Simmons avoided calling on Rosa. When the bell rang, she gathered her things quickly, wanting to escape before anyone could approach her. But as she reached the door, she heard someone call her name. "Mrs. Ortiz." "Hey, wait up." She turned to see a young man hurrying toward her. She recognized him as Thomas, a student who usually sat near the back and asked thoughtful questions. "That was really impressive," he said when he caught up to her. "The way you solved that problem. I've been struggling with implicit differentiation all week." "Oh," Rosa said, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you." "Some of us are meeting at the library tomorrow to study for the quiz next week," Thomas continued. "Would you like to join us? I mean, it seems like you really get this stuff." Rosa was speechless for a moment. No student had spoken directly to her before, let alone invited her to study with them. I have work until 5, she finally managed to say. "We're meeting at 6, Thomas replied. "Third floor of the main library, those study rooms near the mathematics section." Before Rosa could respond, Professor Simmons called Thomas back into the classroom to discuss something. The young man gave Rosa an apologetic smile and hurried away, leaving her standing in the hallway, stunned by the unexpected invitation. That evening, as Rosa prepared dinner, she told her children about what had happened in class. "So you showed up the professor?" Miguel asked, his eyes wide with admiration. At 14, he was at the age where challenging authority seemed like the greatest accomplishment possible. No, Rosa corrected him. "I just solved the problem he asked me to solve." "But he thought you wouldn't be able to," Lucia pointed out. "He was trying to embarrass you, and instead, you impressed everyone. That's amazing, Mama." Rosa smiled as she stirred the pot of beans on the stove. "Maybe, but now I'm worried about this study group tomorrow. What if they're just curious about me? What if they expect me to know everything?" Lucia came over and took the spoon from her mother's hand. "Stop worrying. You solved a problem the professor thought would stump you. You've been studying harder than anyone I know. And besides," she added with a grin, "you're Rosa Ortiz. You've faced scarier things than a bunch of college kids." Rosa laughed, feeling some of her anxiety melt away. Her daughter was right. After raising 2 children alone, after moving to a new country, after building a life from nothing, What was one study group? As she lay in bed that night, Rosa thought about how her father would react if he could see her now. He had always believed she had a gift for mathematics, even when she couldn't see it herself. "Numbers speak to you," he used to say. "You just need to learn how to listen." For the first time since starting college, Rosa felt like maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to hear what the numbers were saying. "This is silly," she whispered to herself. "They're just students. They invited you." Yet her feet remained planted on the sidewalk, unable to move toward the library doors. All afternoon, as she had mopped floors and emptied trash bins, Rosa had considered not showing up. What if the invitation had been a joke? What if they just wanted to see the cleaning lady up close like some curiosity? Or worse, what if they expected her to help them with their homework, to be some kind of math genius? She checked her watch, 5:58. If she was going to run away, now was the time. A memory surfaced. Lucia at age 7, refusing to go to school because some girls had made fun of her secondhand clothes. Sometimes, Rosa had told her daughter, being brave means doing something even when you're scared. Taking a deep breath, Rosa walked up the library steps. She had repeated her own advice to Lucia countless times over the years. It was time to follow it herself. The library was quieter than she expected. Rosa had only been inside a few times, usually to clean the entrance and front desk area early in the mornings. Now in the evening, soft lamps cast warm pools of light over students hunched over books or typing on laptops. She took the stairs to the 3rd floor, her heart pounding with each step. The mathematics section was easy to find, marked by a large sign. Nearby, a row of glass-walled study rooms lined the back wall. Through the windows, she could see several students gathered in one of the middle rooms, textbooks spread across a large table. Thomas spotted her first, waving enthusiastically through the glass. Rosa gave a small wave back, her stomach fluttering, with nerves as she approached the door. "Mrs. Ortiz, you came." Thomas jumped up to greet her as she entered. His genuine smile eased some of her tension. "Everyone, this is Rosa, the one who solved that impossible problem in class yesterday." 4 other students looked up from their books, their expressions ranging from curious to impressed. Rosa recognized a few faces from class but couldn't recall their names. "Hi," she said softly, still standing awkwardly by the door. A young woman with short, dark hair patted the empty chair beside her. "Come sit down. I'm Valerie. That's Chen, Priya, and Angelo." Each student nodded or waved as they were introduced. "We were just arguing about problem set 7. Thomas thinks there's a shortcut for question 3, but none of us can figure it out." Rosa sat down cautiously, placing her backpack on the floor beside her. She pulled out her notebook and textbook, both considerably more worn than the pristine material surrounding her. Priya slid the problem set across the table. "Here's what we're stuck on," she explained. "It's about related rates. We keep getting different answers." Rosa glanced at the problem. It described a ladder sliding down a wall and asked for the rate at which the top of the ladder was moving when it reached a certain height. She had completed this problem the night before, working through it twice to be sure of her answer. "I think," she began, then stopped, suddenly self-conscious. What if her approach was wrong? What if they laughed at her? "Please, go ahead," Chen encouraged. "We've been stuck for 20 minutes. Rosa took a deep breath. "I think the key is to use the Pythagorean theorem first," she said. "The ladder forms a right triangle with the wall and floor." She sketched a quick diagram in her notebook, labeling the sides and writing out the equation. As she explained her approach, the other students leaned in, watching her work through each step methodically. "Oh," Thomas exclaimed when she reached the crucial differentiation. "I see what I was doing wrong. I was differentiating with respect to time before setting up the relationship between the variables." Rosa nodded. "My father always said, make sure you know what you're looking for before you start the journey." "Your father sounds wise," Valerie said. "Was he a mathematician?" "A teacher," Rosa replied. "In a small village school in Mexico. He taught everything. Reading, history, mathematics. But numbers were his passion. "And he taught you calculus?" Angelo asked, sounding impressed. Rosa shook her head. "Not formally, but he showed me how to think about problems, how to break them down. The actual calculus I'm learning now, just like all of you." "Well, you're picking it up faster than me?" Chen laughed. "I've been studying this stuff for weeks and still get confused about when to use the chain rule." What Rosa had feared would be an awkward, uncomfortable experience slowly transformed into something unexpected, an enjoyable evening of shared learning. The students didn't treat her like an outsider or a curiosity. They asked for her input. When stuck, offered explanations when she had questions, and included her in their mathematical debates as if she had always been part of their group. 2 hours passed quickly. When Priya mentioned she needed to head home, Rosa was surprised to discover it was already 8:15 p.m. "I should go too," she said, gathering her things. "My daughter will be wondering where I am." "You have a daughter?" Valerie asked. "And a son." Rosa nodded. "Lucia is 18 and Miguel is 14. The students exchanged glances, clearly doing the math in their heads. Rosa was used to this reaction, the calculation of her age, the realization that she had been raising children while they were still children themselves. "That's awesome," Thomas said finally. "That you're doing this, I mean. College and everything." Rosa smiled, touched by his sincerity. "It's never too late to learn something new," my father used to say. As they walked out of the library together, Thomas mentioned they were planning to meet again next Tuesday. "Same time, same place. You'll join us, right?" Rosa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." On the bus ride home, Rosa found herself smiling. The evening had been nothing like she'd feared. These young people, despite being from different worlds than her own, had welcomed her knowledge and perspective. For a few hours she hadn't been the cleaning lady or the old student. She had simply been someone with something valuable to contribute. When she arrived home, Lucia was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around her as she worked on her own homework. "How was it?" she asked, looking up as Rosa entered. "Good," Rosa replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Really good." "See? I told you," Lucia said triumphantly. "Did they ask you about that problem you solved in class?" "A little. But mostly we just worked together on the homework." Rosa set her backpack down and went to the refrigerator. "Have you eaten? I can make you something." "I already ate. There's a plate for you in the microwave." Lucia watched her mother closely. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter maybe, like when you used to dance in the kitchen with Dad." Rosa felt a warmth spread through her chest at the mention of Luis. He would have been so proud to see her now, pursuing the education she had put aside when they started their family. "It feels good to use my brain this way," she admitted, "to be seen for something other than my cleaning skills." The following Monday, Rosa arrived at calculus class to find Thomas waving her over to a seat he had saved beside him in the second row. As she made her way through the classroom, she noticed several other students greeting her with smiles or nods of recognition, small gestures that would have meant nothing to most people, but meant everything to her. Professor Simmons entered the room and immediately launched into a lecture on integration techniques. Rosa took detailed notes, finding the concepts easier to follow than before. Was it because she was understanding the material better, or because she no longer felt like an imposter waiting to be exposed? Halfway through the class, Professor Simmons posed a question about finding the area under a curve. Several hands shot up, including Rosa's, something she had never done before. The professor's eyes swept across the room, lingering briefly on Rosa's raised hand before calling on Chen instead. Rosa lowered her arm, trying not to feel disappointed. She knew it would take more than solving one problem to earn Professor Simmons's respect. After class, as students filed out of the room, Professor Simmons called out, "Mrs. Ortiz, a moment, please." Rosa approached his desk, reminded of their conversation after the first day of class, but this time she stood a little straighter, meeting his gaze directly. "I noticed you've been participating in a study group. he said, shuffling papers on his desk. Yes, Rosa replied, wondering how he knew. A few students invited me to join them. Professor Simmons nodded slowly. Your work on the last homework assignment showed improvement. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Your approach to problem 4 was interesting, not the standard method I taught in class. Oh, Rosa said, unsure if this was criticism or not. I tried the standard method, but I kept making errors, so I found another way that made more sense to me. Yes, well. The professor adjusted his glasses. Mathematics allows for multiple paths to the same destination. Some are more elegant than others, but what matters is arriving at the correct answer. He looked at her directly. You arrived at the correct answer, Mrs. Ortiz. It wasn't exactly praise, but coming from Professor Simmons, it felt like a significant acknowledgement. Thank you, Professor. As Rosa walked out of the classroom, she felt a new sensation, a growing confidence that perhaps she did belong here after all. She had faced the challenge of that first difficult problem on the board and survived. She had found unexpected allies in her fellow students, and now even Professor Simmons seemed to be seeing her differently. The path ahead would still be difficult. There would be more challenging problems to solve, more late nights studying after long days of work, more moments of doubt. But for now, Rosa allowed herself to enjoy this small victory, the feeling that her father had been right all along about her hidden talents with numbers. That evening, as she cleaned the science building, Rosa found herself humming softly as she worked, something she hadn't done in a very long time. The attention made Rosa uncomfortable. She had never sought the spotlight, had never wanted to be anything other than a good mother, a reliable worker, and now a successful student. But suddenly, people she had never met were nodding to her in greeting or asking if she was that woman from Professor Simmons' class. The Tuesday study group had grown from 5 students to nearly 15, crowding the small library room and forcing them to move to a larger space. Rosa still found it strange that these young people wanted her input, valued her way of explaining difficult concepts. She hadn't planned on becoming a tutor, but somehow that was what was happening. You break it down in ways that make sense, Thomas had explained when she expressed her surprise at the group's growth. Professor Simmons is brilliant, but he skips steps in his explanations. You don't assume we already know things. Rosa understood this instinctively. After all, she was learning alongside them, encountering many concepts for the first time herself. The difference was that she wasn't afraid to admit when she didn't understand something, to ask questions others might consider too basic. There's no shame in not knowing, she often told the frustrated students. The shame is in pretending to know when you don't. As midterm exams approached, Rosa found herself busier than ever. Beyond her usual cleaning shifts and family responsibilities, she now spent 3 evenings a week at the library with the study group. Her own study time had been squeezed into the late hours of the night, after Lucia and Miguel were asleep, leading to many mornings when she struggled to keep her eyes open, while mopping the university hallways. You can't keep going like this, Lucia told her one morning, finding Rosa asleep at the kitchen table, her face pressed against her calculus textbook. You're going to make yourself sick. Rosa straightened up, blinking away sleep. I'm fine. Just a little tired. A little tired. Mama, you barely eat dinner before you're back to studying. And now with these extra study groups. Lucia shook her head. I'm worried about you. It's just until midterms, Rosa promised, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. The commitment she had made, to herself, to her children, to her father's memory, went beyond one exam. And helping the other students actually helps me understand the material better. Lucia didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she placed a cup of coffee in front of her mother and said, At least let me help more around the house. Miguel, too. We can handle dinner and laundry. Rosa felt a rush of gratitude and pride in her daughter. Thank you, mi vida. That would help a lot. That afternoon in class, Professor Simmons announced that the midterm exam would take place the following week. "This exam will account for 30% of your final grade," he said, his stern gaze sweeping across the room. "I suggest you all prepare thoroughly." As students packed up their things at the end of class, murmuring anxiously about the upcoming test, Professor Simmons called out, "Mrs. Ortiz, a word please." Rosa approached his desk, wondering what he wanted. Their interactions had been minimal since the day she had solved the problem on the board, limited to brief comments about her homework assignments. "It has come to my attention," Professor Simmons said, "that you've been running some kind of tutoring group." "Not exactly tutoring," Rosa corrected gently. "We study together. We help each other." The professor removed his glasses and polished them with a small cloth. "Well, whatever you call it, I've had several students mention that your explanations have been helpful to them." Was that a compliment? Rosa couldn't quite tell from his tone. "I've also noticed," he continued, "that the quality of homework submissions has improved among some students who were previously struggling. Students who, I understand, have been attending your study sessions." "They work very hard," Rosa said, not wanting to take credit for others' improvements. Professor Simmons replaced his glasses and looked at her directly. "Mrs. Ortiz, I've been teaching calculus for 27 years. In that time, I've seen all types of students. Some have natural ability but no work ethic. Others work diligently but lack intuitive understanding." He paused, and Rosa waited, unsure where this was going. "Rarely do I encounter someone with both." Another pause. "Your midterm exam will be interesting." With that cryptic comment, he dismissed her, turning his attention to papers on his desk. Rosa left the classroom feeling puzzled. Was he suggesting she had both natural ability and work ethic, or was he implying something else entirely? The next day, as Rosa cleaned the faculty lounge in the mathematics department, she overheard two professors talking. She normally tuned out conversations, respecting the privacy of the faculty, but she froze when she heard her name. "Ortiz, the cleaning woman," one voice said. "Richard mentioned her. Said she's been showing up his regular students." "Is she some kind of math prodigy?" another voice asked. "Hardly," the first voice scoffed. "Richard thinks she's probably getting help from someone. Maybe one of the graduate assistants. No way a woman with no formal education suddenly understands implicit differentiation." Rosa's hands tightened around her cleaning cloth. So that was what Professor Simmons had been implying, that she was cheating. The unfairness of it stung more than she expected. She considered confronting him, demanding he test her knowledge, directly if he had doubts. But what good would that do? He would likely see it as confirmation of his suspicions. Why else would she be so defensive? That evening at the study group, Rosa was quieter than usual, her mind still churning over what she had overheard. The students noticed her distraction. "Everything okay, Rosa?" Valerie asked during a break. "You seem somewhere else tonight." Rosa considered brushing off the concern, but these students had become something like friends over the past weeks. "I overheard some professors talking today," she admitted. Some people think I must be cheating, that I couldn't possibly understand this material on my own." The reaction was immediate and vocal. "That's ridiculous," Thomas exclaimed. "You explain this stuff better than half the TAs." "It's because you're older and you clean the buildings," Priya said angrily. "If you were some 18-year-old computer science major, no one would question it. Or if you were a man," Valerie added quietly. Rosa was touched by their indignation on her behalf, but it didn't erase the hurt. "Maybe," she said with a small shrug. "But there's nothing I can do about it." "Actually, there is," Chen said, his usually quiet voice firm. "Ace the midterm. If you do well enough, no one can claim you're getting help." "He's right," Angelo nodded. "Simmons watches everyone like a hawk during exams. No one could cheat even if they wanted to." The student's confidence in her was heartwarming, but as Rosa rode the bus home that night, doubts crept in. What if she froze during the test? What if all the extra hours helping others had left her own understanding shaky? What if Professor Simmons was right to be suspicious? Not because she was cheating, but because she didn't truly belong in a university classroom. The weekend before the midterm, Rosa declined to meet with the study group, choosing instead to focus on her own preparation. She reviewed every homework problem, reread her notes multiple times, and worked through practice problems until her hand cramped from writing. Sunday evening, as she quizzed herself on integration formulas, there was a knock at the apartment door. Rosa opened it to find Thomas, Valerie, and 3 other students from the calculus class standing in the hallway, carrying pizza boxes and study materials. "What are you doing here?" Rosa asked, surprised. "How did you know where I live?" "Lucia called us," Thomas explained. "She said you were studying yourself into exhaustion and could use some help for a change." Rosa turned to see her daughter grinning sheepishly from the kitchen doorway. "You've been helping everyone else," Lucia said. "I thought maybe they could help you too." For a moment, Rosa was too moved to speak. Then she stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Well, come in then, but I warn you, my apartment is nothing like those fancy study rooms at the library." "It's perfect," Valerie said, settling at the kitchen table. "Now let's make sure our favorite tutor is ready to show Professor Simmons exactly what she can do." The night before the exam, Rosa slept better than she had in weeks. Whatever happened, tomorrow she had done her best, and more importantly, she had found something she hadn't expected when she enrolled in this course. A community of people who saw her not just as the cleaning lady, but as a person with value, with intelligence, with something to contribute. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought of her father and his unwavering belief in her abilities. "You will surprise them all someday, mi Rosa," he had often told her. Perhaps that someday had finally arrived. The morning of the midterm exam, Rosa arrived early, taking her usual seat in the front row. Professor Simmons stood at the front of the room, watching students file in with his customary stern expression. When his gaze fell on Rosa, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave him a small, confident nod. One by one, her study group friends entered the classroom, each giving her an encouraging smile or thumbs up as they passed. Thomas took the seat beside her, leaning over to whisper, "Ready to make history?" Rosa smiled. "Ready to do my best," she corrected. "That's all any of us can do." As Professor Simmons began distributing the exam papers, Rosa took a deep breath and cleared her mind of everything except the mathematics she had worked so hard to understand. Whatever happened in the next hour would not define her worth as a person, but it might just redefine what others believed possible. When her exam paper slid onto her desk, Rosa picked up her pencil and began to read the first problem, a strange sense of calm settling over her. The numbers and symbols that had once seemed so foreign now felt like old friends waiting to tell her their secrets. "Why is he taking so long to grade them?" Valerie wondered aloud as they left class on Thursday. "It's just one set of exams." "Maybe he's double-checking everything," Thomas suggested, "making sure there aren't any mistakes." Rosa said nothing, but her stomach twisted with anxiety. What if she had failed? What if all her hard work, all those late nights studying until her eyes burned, had been for nothing? What if Professor Simmons had been right to doubt her? Friday morning, Rosa was cleaning the faculty lounge when she noticed a stack of papers on the coffee table. Normally, she was careful not to disturb any documents while cleaning, but a familiar name caught her eye. Her own. Pausing in her work, she glanced at the paper. It was a spreadsheet listing student names and grades for the calculus midterm. Her eyes found her name halfway down the list. Ortiz Rosa, 98%. 98%. The highest score in the class. Rosa's hands trembled as she stepped away from the table, not wanting to look further. This wasn't how she wanted to find out. She would wait for the official announcement, pretend surprised like everyone else, but knowing the truth sent a wave of relief washing through her that was so powerful, she had to lean against the wall for support. She hadn't failed. She hadn't merely passed. She had excelled. That afternoon in class, Professor Simmons finally addressed the midterm results. "I've finished grading your exams," he announced, his voice as stern as ever. The class average was 74%, which is consistent with previous years. He began returning the exams, calling students to the front one by one. Rosa watched as her classmates received their papers, some looking pleased, others disappointed. Thomas gave her a thumbs up when he saw his score, an 88%. Ortiz, Professor Simmons called finally. Rosa walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding despite already knowing her score. The professor held out her exam, and for the briefest moment their eyes met. Something had changed in his gaze, a grudging respect perhaps, or at least the absence of his earlier skepticism. "Well done," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Rosa returned to her seat, exam in hand, and allowed herself a small smile at the red 98% circled at the top of the page. There were check marks throughout, with only one small error marked in the final problem. A careless arithmetic mistake rather than a conceptual misunderstanding. As class ended, Professor Simmons cleared his throat. "Before you leave, I'd like to make an announcement. The mathematics department hosts a distinguished guest lecture series each semester. Next Friday, we'll welcome Dr. Eleanor Walsh from MIT, who will be discussing her work on differential equations and their applications in climate science. All students are encouraged to attend," the class murmured with mild interest, but most were more focused on their midterm results as they packed up to leave. "Mrs. Ortiz," Professor Simmons called as students filed out. "A moment, please." Rosa approached his desk, wondering what he wanted. Was he going to accuse her of somehow cheating on the exam after all? "I've spoken with Dr. Walsh's assistant," he said, adjusting his glasses. "It seems she's interested in meeting students from diverse backgrounds during her visit. As the department's highest-scoring non-traditional student, your presence at a small reception following her lecture would be appropriate." Rosa blinked in surprise. "Me? At a reception with a professor from MIT?" "Yes, well, Professor Simmons shuffled some papers on his desk. Dr. Walsh has done considerable work on educational access for underrepresented groups. Your situation might be of interest to her." Rosa wasn't sure if she should feel honored or like a curiosity to be examined. "I'll have to check if I can get time off from my evening cleaning shift," she said cautiously. "That's been addressed," Professor Simmons replied. "I've spoken with your supervisor. You've been excused from your duties that evening." He had gone. To her supervisor? Rosa didn't know whether to be grateful or offended at this interference in her work schedule. "Thank you," she said finally, deciding that whatever his motivations, the opportunity to meet a renowned mathematician was too valuable to refuse. As she left the classroom, she found Thomas and Valerie waiting for her in the hallway. 98%, Valerie exclaimed, having overheard Rosa's score from another student. "That's amazing, you beat everyone." "Not everyone," Rosa corrected modestly. "Professor Simmons mentioned the department's highest-scoring non-traditional student, not the highest overall." "No, you definitely had the highest score," Thomas insisted. "Chen got a 94%, and he usually tops every exam. You beat him by 4 points. Rosa felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by disbelief. Had she really outscored every student in the class? Even those who had been studying mathematics for years? "What did Simmons want?" Valerie asked. "He looked almost human when he was talking to you." Rosa told them about the invitation to meet Dr. Walsh. "That's a big deal," Thomas said, impressed. "Walsh is like a celebrity in the math world. Her work on modeling complex systems is revolutionary." "And Simmons arranged for you to get time off work?" Valerie raised her eyebrows. "Maybe he's not such a robot after all." That evening, Rosa shared the news with Lucia and Miguel over dinner. Both were thrilled for her, though neither fully understood the significance of meeting someone from MIT. "Does this mean you're famous now?" Miguel asked, half joking. "Hardly," Rosa laughed. "But it is a special opportunity." Lucia squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm so proud of you, Mama. Dad would be too." The night of Dr. Walsh's lecture arrived, and Rosa found herself more nervous than she had been for the midterm exam. She had borrowed a simple but elegant dress from Valerie, who insisted that Rosa couldn't attend a faculty reception in her usual slacks and blouse. Lucia had helped style her hair, pulling it back in a sophisticated twist that made Rosa feel both beautiful and strange, like she was playing a role in someone else's life. The lecture hall was packed when she arrived. She spotted Thomas and Priya saving her a seat near the front and joined them gratefully. "You look amazing," Priya whispered. "Very professional." "I feel like a fraud," Rosa admitted quietly. "Like everyone will take one look and know I don't belong." "That's just imposter syndrome," Thomas told her. "Everyone feels that way sometimes. Even Dr. Walsh probably does." Before Rosa could respond, the lights dimmed, and Professor Simmons stepped onto the stage to introduce the guest speaker. Dr. Eleanor Walsh was not what Rosa had expected. Rather than the stern, intimidating figure she had imagined, the MIT professor was a warm, energetic woman in her 60s with bright eyes and a quick smile. Her lecture, though covering complex mathematical concepts, was surprisingly accessible, filled with real-world examples and occasional humor. "Mathematics isn't just about solving equations on paper," Dr. Walsh said toward the end of her talk. "It's about understanding the patterns that govern our world, from the flow of ocean currents to the spread of information through social networks. Anyone with curiosity and persistence can discover these patterns, regardless of their background or formal education." Rosa found herself leaning forward in her seat, absorbing every word. This was how her father had spoken about mathematics, not as a set of rules to be memorized, but as a way of seeing the world more clearly. After the lecture ended and the applause died down, students and faculty began making their way to a reception room down the hall. Rosa hesitated, suddenly unsure if she should attend despite the invitation. "Come on," Thomas encouraged. "You earned this." The reception was smaller than Rosa had expected, perhaps 30 people in total, mostly professors and a few graduate students. Professor Simmons spotted her at the entrance and, to her surprise, came over immediately. "Mrs. Ortiz, good. Dr. Walsh has expressed interest in meeting you." He guided her through the crowd to where the MIT professor was chatting with several faculty members. "Dr. Walsh," Professor Simmons said, "this is Rosa Ortiz, the student I mentioned." Dr. Walsh turned, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "Mrs. Ortiz, Richard has told me about your remarkable journey. A working mother pursuing calculus while maintaining the highest grade in the class. I'm impressed." Rosa felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Your lecture was very inspiring." "Tell me," Dr. Walsh said, gesturing for Rosa to join her. At a quieter corner of the room, "What drew you to mathematics after all these years?" As they talked, Rosa found herself sharing the story of her father, his love for numbers, and her own delayed dream of education. Dr. Walsh listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences as one of the few women in her graduate program decades earlier. "You know," Dr. Walsh said after Rosa explained how she broke down complex problems, "you have a natural pedagogical instinct. The way you approach these concepts is exactly what we try to teach our education students at MIT." "Pedagogical?" Rosa asked, unfamiliar with the term. "Teaching," Dr. Walsh clarified. "The ability to make difficult concepts accessible to others. From what Professor Simmons tells me, you've become quite the unofficial tutor here." Rosa glanced across the room to where Professor Simmons was watching them, his expression unreadable. Had he been complimenting her to Dr. Walsh? "Have you considered teaching Mrs. Ortiz?" Dr. Walsh asked. "Not necessarily at the university level, but perhaps in community education programs. There's a tremendous need for instructors who can connect with adult learners, especially in STEM fields." The question caught Rosa off guard. "Teaching? Me? I'm still learning myself." "The best teachers always are," Dr. Walsh smiled. "Here's my card. I run a summer program for non-traditional educators. If you're interested, I'd love to have you apply." As the evening wound down, Rosa found herself surrounded by professors who had previously looked through her as she cleaned their offices, now engaging her in conversation about her approach to mathematics. It was surreal, like stepping into an alternate reality where she was valued for her mind rather than her labor. When she finally left the university that night, Rosa stood for a moment on the steps, looking up at the stars. 6 months ago, she had been invisible on this campus, just another worker in a blue uniform. Now she had the highest grade in a calculus class, an invitation to a prestigious summer program, and most importantly, a newfound confidence in her own abilities. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, final exams, decisions about continuing her education, balancing her responsibilities. But standing there under the vast night sky, Rosa felt a sense of possibility that had been dormant for too long. The Raimo. Following Monday, as Rosa entered Professor Simmons's classroom, she found a note on her usual seat. See me in my office at 3 p.m. regarding a department tutoring position. Prof. S. She smiled to herself as she took her seat. The simple woman who had been forced to solve calculus to shame her had not only survived the challenge, she had turned it into an opportunity to change her life. And as her father had always promised, she had indeed shocked the entire class.